Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Life After the Death podcast. If this is your first time joining me, I am so glad that you are here. My name is Tamara Kiera, and I'm founder of Be Intentional, where we challenge the way that people think so that we can become more intentional in the way that we lead, build, and the way that we live. And one of the reasons I love these conversations is because they give us permission to question ideas we've accepted for years without ever stopping to ask whether they were actually true or not. So much of the way we experience life is shaped by beliefs we inherited, expectations we absorbed, and also stories we've continued telling ourselves simply because they've just always been there. Every now and then, I think it's healthy to pause, just examine those stories and ask whether they're still serving the life we're trying to build, right? And that's really what this podcast is all about. It's about allowing outdated beliefs and unhealthy narratives and limiting ways of thinking to come to an end so the healthier version and healthier perspectives, right, can take their place in our minds. Because every meaningful transformation begins long before our circumstances change. So, this is really about embracing that transformation. And it begins the moment we become willing to think differently. So, with that being said, let's jump into today's conversation. And I'm really excited about today's conversation because I think it's something um, that really needs to be challenged because it's a belief that I think a lot of us have been carrying around for just just too long. Um, so as we're moving into the third quarter of the year, I've noticed something that seems to happen almost like clockwork around this time. People just start naturally taking inventory of their lives and, looking at what has been accomplished um, from the beginning of the year until now, which I think is normal, right? We start looking at goals that we wrote back in January, vision boards we were excited to create, the plans that we convinced were going to change everything. And then we start asking ourselves, I am I where I'm supposed to be right now? Because I'm feeling a little behind. I thought I'd be further along by now. What's up? What's going on? What am I doing wrong? And I've heard that sentence more times than I can count. I mean, honestly, it can be, having a conversation with family or with one of my clients or, even, speaking to my daughter. She has even said it herself, like, Mommy, I just feel like I'm running behind. And I'm like, girl, what? Really? And I asked her the same question I'm about to ask you. Who told you that? Because I mean, we've all have moments where we question our progress, right? I mean, I've had those moments too. And I've asked myself that question myself, like, am I behind? But honestly, if we just really sit back and just think, who told me I was behind? Because we say we're behind with so much confidence, almost like somebody handed us a report card on our life and told us we didn't make the honor roll, right? So, you know, we're behind according to who? And according to what timeline? And what rules? Uh, who's making these rules up in the first place? Because If I'm not mistaken, right? Life is filled with lessons, mistakes, setbacks, unexpected detours, and all this is going to be mixed in with moments of joy, the answered prayers, opportunities, wins, successes. I mean, that's just the human experience. It's called life. And that's what we're living. That's what we're experiencing and um taking in daily. So, with all that being said, who created this fairy tale that everybody's walk is supposed to look the same? I realize that most of us are carrying around expectations we never stop to examine because somewhere along the way, we accepted this invisible timeline that says by a certain age, we should have accomplished this, we should have owned this, earned that title, reached this income, found that right person, or finally have at least almost everything figured out. But why? Who who decided that? Because if there's one thing I've learned about life, it's that it almost never unfolds in a straight line. It has twists and turns and it stretches you, it surprises you. Sometimes it asks you to let go of the very thing you were convinced you were supposed to hold on to forever. I was going through one of my old journals not too long ago, and I couldn't help but to laugh, reading through it. Um, I written in it, a few years ago, and some of my goals that I put in there, they happened, right? I reached them, and then some of them I didn't. But what really caught my eye and my attention about it wasn't the goals that I hadn't accomplished. It was me realizing that there were things that was written on those pages that I don't even want anymore because things have changed since then. My desires have shifted. My path and the direction of that path has pivoted. And a lot of the times when that happens, you have to return back to the drawing board. And guess what? That's okay. In fact, I think that's one of the healthiest things we can do. We give ourselves permission to grow, but somewhere we don't give ourselves permission to outgrow old dreams. And I'm not talking about dreams that have expired because they never manifested. I'm talking about those dreams that no longer align with who you are today. Because how many of us are judging our current lives by dreams that belong to an older version of ourselves? Maybe you're frustrated that you haven't arrived at a destination you picked 10 years ago. But maybe the person who picked that destination isn't even the person you are today. Think about that. Maybe you've learned things you couldn't have known back then when you set these goals. Maybe your priorities have changed. Maybe becoming a parent may have changed your wants, your needs, the things that you like. Maybe losing someone may have jarred something inside of you that you just really can't shake and let go of. And it's pointing you in towards something new. Maybe you have built a business already and that changed your direction. So why are we still expecting the timeline to stay exactly the same? Let me ask you something. Have you ever considered that you may have actually been measuring the wrong thing all along? Because when people tell me they feel behind, they're almost always measuring what they've produced. They're measuring the title they haven't earned yet, the business they haven't built yet, the money they haven't made yet, the relationship they haven't found yet. In other words, they're measuring outcomes. But very few people stop long enough to measure who they're becoming while they're working towards these outcomes. And I think that's the conversation that we're not having. What if life was never just preparing you for the destination? What if it was you that was being prepared for the destination? Because those are two completely different things. Okay. So let's just think about that for a second, right? If you had become the CEO you wanted to become 10 years ago, would you have had the wisdom to lead that company? If you had made the money you wanted to make 5 years ago, would you have had the discipline to manage it? What if the opportunity has shown up before your character was ready to carry it? Would it have become a blessing or would it have it became a burden? See, we spend so much time asking when is it going to happen that we rarely stop to ask who is this season making me become? I've learned something from building businesses that I think applies to life just as much as it applies to entrepreneurship. And that is everybody loves the launch, right? Everybody celebrates the ribbon cutting. Everybody wants to post the grand opening, the promotion, the revenue milestone, or the new office. Those moments are exciting and they do deserve to be celebrated, don't get me wrong. But nobody's talking about what happens before all of that. Nobody's talking about how you spent weeks and months rewriting systems that weren't working. Nobody's talking about documenting processes that only existed inside of your head, right? And that you had to manifest and make come to life, right? Nobody talks about rebuilding your business model after realizing the first one wasn't sustainable. Nobody talks about the hundreds of small decisions that quietly made the big moment possible. We're not talking about that, right? And maybe that's because none of those things look exciting from the outside. And I get it. But that doesn't make them any less important. But maybe that's exactly where we get ourselves into trouble. We assume that because we can't see the harvest, that nothing is growing. We assume that because life was slower than we expected it to feel, we've somehow taken a wrong turn. we start questioning our purpose, our decisions, even ourselves and our capability, simply because the season we're in doesn't look the way we imagined it would. Look, not every season is supposed to produce fruit, and that's just real. If every season produced fruit, there never be a reason to develop roots. There never be a reason to strengthen the foundation, to prune, to prepare, to rebuild, or to create the kind of structure that can actually sustain what's coming next. And isn't that exactly what we do in business? Because I don't know a single successful business owner who spends every month launching something new. Do you know how exhausting that would be? There's seasons where you're focused on growth, right? And then there are seasons where you're focused on the infrastructure that supports the growth. ¿Entiendes? Where you're rewriting the SOPs, you're cleaning up the systems, you're refining your client experience, right? You're documenting the processes, you're looking at your financials, you're asking yourself what's working, what's no longer serving where you're going. And none of those are glamorous things to do, right? Those things are not making the cut to be posted on social media. And let's be honest, if it does make the cut, how many likes is it getting? But guess what? It's still necessary. All of that is still necessary. Matter of fact, it's actually some of the most valuable work that you're ever going to do. You you might be in a season where your career feels quiet. And instead of seeing it as a setback, it's actually giving you the space to develop the skills you've been putting off. Maybe this is the season where you finally earn that certification, take the class you've been talking about for years, or become the kind of leader you've always admired. Maybe you're a stay at home mom and you've convinced yourself you're behind because you're not building the business at the pace you thought you would. But what if this season is not about you building a company? What if the season is asking you to build a home, to create memories your children will carry for the rest of their lives, and to be present in a chapter that you can never get back? Or maybe business has slowed down and your first instinct is to panic. What am I doing wrong? Why aren't more clients calling? What happened? But what if the better question is, what work has this slower season finally created space for me to maximize on? Because when we're busy, we spend a lot of our time working in the business. And then when things slow down, maybe that's the invitation to start working on the business. You see? Maybe that's when you finally start building that onboarding process. Maybe that's when you create your company charter. Revisit your vision. Because let's be honest, the vision you had 3 years ago might not even be the vision that you have today. Things change, people grow, businesses evolve. And I want to share something that's been helping me for a while now when it comes to this. It's something that I've practiced in my own life. And I've shared it with, family and friends and my clients over the years. And every time I've walked someone through it, I've watched the pressure start to come off of their shoulders because they finally see a different way of processing where they were at a specific time in their lives. Sometimes we don't need another motivational quote. Sometimes we don't need somebody telling us to work harder or to push through. We just need better language for what we're experiencing because once we can name it, we can stop fighting it. And what I started doing is something that I call seasonal work. It's really nothing more than giving a name to something that we've all experienced, but never really knew how to explain it. And once I gave it a name, I stopped looking at every season through the same lens, right? I stopped expecting every chapter of my life to produce the same outcomes. And instead, I started asking myself what that particular season was asking of me. It completely changed the way I processed disappointment, how I processed delay, growth, and even success, because I realized every season had a different assignment. The first thing I ask myself is, what season am I in? Before I ask what's next, I have to be honest about where I am. Am I building something? Am I healing from something? Am I learning? Am I waiting? Am I preparing? Am I simplifying? Am I recovering? Because if I misidentify the season, I'm almost guaranteed to misidentify the work, right? Once I'm honest about the season I'm in, the next question becomes a whole lot easier. Okay. I stop asking why it's not happening faster. And then I start asking, what is the season requiring from me? Because that's a completely different conversation. Because now I'm no longer fighting the season, I'm accepting the excitement that comes with it. Every season asks something different of us. And I think a lot of our frustration comes from trying to do summer work in a winter season. I mean, that's crazy. But that's okay because we're going to get all of that straightened out today. You're going to let go of that way of thinking today. So from there, I remind myself to stay focused on today's work, not next year's work, not 5 years from now, not today's work. Harvest work isn't planting work, and planting work isn't pruning work. Every season has responsibilities that belong to it. And I don't have to carry responsibilities that belong to another chapter of my life. I just have to faithfully do the work that's sitting in front of me today. And then with that, I stop and I ask myself one more question. Am I measuring the right things? Because maybe success this season isn't revenue. Maybe it's consistency. Maybe it's peace. Maybe it's stronger systems, healthier relationships. Maybe it's finally creating those boundaries that you've been saying that you want to put in place. Maybe it's becoming the kind of leader who can actually sustain the next level instead of simply reaching it. And then finally, I remind myself that every season is preparing me for another one. That's probably the biggest shift I've had to make. I stopped looking at seasons as interruptions and I started looking at them as preparation. Every season is leaving something in me that the next season is going to require. And I don't want to waste this one wishing I was already somewhere else. I want to leave this season knowing I embraced everything it came to teach me. The seasonal work doesn't care what your title is. It really doesn't. We all go through it. You're not gonna dodge it. You're not getting away from it. It doesn't care whether you're running a business, climbing the corporate ladder, raising children, starting over, or trying to figure out what comes next. The questions remain the same. The assignment is the only thing that changes. Start training your mind to shift to this type of thinking. But don't confuse quiet work with unimportant work because some of the most significant things we'll ever build can't be measured on a balance sheet or announced in a social media post. I don't expect this conversation to magically change your circumstances. And I don't expect you to wake up tomorrow with every answer you've been looking for because life usually doesn't work that way. What I do hope is that the next time you catch yourself saying I'm behind, you'll pause for just a second before believing it. I hope you'll remember this conversation and ask yourself a different question. Instead of asking, why am I behind? You'll ask yourself, what season am I in? And what is this season requiring of me? Because I have a feeling that that one question has the potential to change far more than constantly asking yourself when life is finally going to speed up for you. If there's one thing I want you to take away from today, it's this: don't confuse a different season with a wrong season. Just because your life doesn't look the way you expected it to doesn't automatically mean you've missed your moments. And that's exactly why I wanted this conversation to be more than just something you listen to on your drive to work or whatever you're doing while you're listening to me. Um, I wanted it to become something you can actually sit with because these things aren't questions you answer in 5 minutes. They're questions you revisit as life changes, as you grow, and as new seasons begin to unfold. So, if today's conversation resonated with you and you're thinking, I know I need to spend a little bit more time with this on this subject and kind of dissect it a little bit more, but not knowing really where to start, right? I've created a guide called the Seasonal Work Companion, and it's for this exact reason. It's designed to walk you through the 5 seasonal questions, give you the space to reflect, challenge your thinking, and help you identify the season you're actually in instead of the season you think you should be in. And if you want to go ahead and move forward with getting that, you can go grab your copy at beintentional.com. And I want to touch on another thing before I let you go. Do not rush through this. Okay? Give yourself permission to sit with the questions. Allow them to challenge you. Let them uncover things you may not have noticed before. Because the goal isn't to finish the guide in just one sitting. The goal is to leave with a clear understanding of where you are, what the season is asking of you, and how you can move through it with greater intention and a whole lot more peace. Because maybe, just maybe, you're not behind. Maybe you are exactly where you need to be. Maybe the season isn't standing between you and your future. Maybe this season is quietly building the foundation your future will stand on. So, with that being said, thank you. Thank you for spending your time with me today because I never take it for granted that you allow me into your headphones, your car rides, your walks, in your homes. My hope is that every time we come together, you leave thinking a little differently than we did before you pressed play. And until next time, keep asking better questions, keep showing up with intention, keep doing the work your season is asking of you because no season is ever wasted when you're willing to learn from it. And remember, you don't have to chase the next season. Just be faithful to this one. And until next time, be intentional.